Okay, welcome everybody. We have a room full of people here, and I'm also seeing we have a Zoom room full of people. We will get started here in just a moment. So giving people a chance to get in and get their audio connected. Can anyone give me a thumbs up on Zoom if the audio sounds okay to you? Good, good. Okay, got that. All right, so welcome. Hopefully you're in the right session. This is supporting your teen's career search. I would love to see who is in the room. Our parents and guardians. Okay, any students? Yay, okay, any educators or anyone else who works with youth, maybe? Okay, and maybe some of you raise your hand more than once. All right, great. So we're going to talk a little bit about different ways that you can support teens as they are embarking on their career journeys. My name is Kathi Terami. I work for a nonprofit organization called CLiC. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And online in the Zoom, Lauren, you can introduce yourself. My colleague Lauren is online moderating the chat and we'll be answering questions in Zoom, and I can answer questions here in the room. And a big thank you to Colin, our mic runner. So he will be going around the room if you have something you want to share or a question to ask. And Kathi Printon is our Zoom liaison, so she'll let us know what's happening in Zoom. And Colin for tech support here at UVM. It took a big team to make all these workshops happen. So just a little bit about the continuum of career development. Our programming for our nonprofit organization starts with students in elementary school with career awareness. So not about kids picking careers, but just becoming aware of what different career fields there are. I have been a guest speaker in a kindergarten classroom where we talk about teaching as a profession, and 5-year-olds found out that day that their teachers were working. So not really understanding the role of everyone in communities, and that some of those roles are jobs. So in middle school, more about career exploration. It's a really good time for youth to start exploring different options and matching those up with their interests. All the way into high school, what we'll be talking about today is more career preparation and planning, getting some practice, building skills, and planning what they're going to do after high school. So our organization has worked with just over 850 educators, over 27,000 students, and 1,600 employers since 1998. So it's kind of our jam. This is what we do. We have only for the past 3 years been working directly with parents. So this is kind of new to us. So I would love your feedback after the session or in the eval about what you thought about this content. Okay, so we're going to do a poll on Zoom and a poll in the room with showing your hands. If you can kind of think and estimate, there's no wrong answer. If you talk about career planning with your teen frequently, occasionally, or rarely. So let's pull up that Zoom poll, and then in the room, raise your hand if it's frequently. If you think you talk with your teen frequently about career planning. Occasionally? Rarely? Okay, so after you give people on Zoom, is the Zoom poll up? Did it go up? So let's give the Zoom poll a second to go up. Okay, they were. So I ask this question, of course, because we're talking about supporting your teen's career search, because we ask this question of youth who participate in our programs. So this is just something I'll share with you, that the students we work with, when we ask this question of them, 70% of them say adults talk with them about their career planning, sometimes or hardly ever, and 30% frequently or often. A lot of times the youth who answer frequently or often, it's through a school program. They might have a work-based learning coordinator at their school, someone coordinating internships. A lot of students who go to tech centers, they're talking about it all the time. But students who aren't in a tech center program, or maybe don't have a work-based learning coordinator in their school, it's pretty rare that anyone talks with them about their careers. So for you as parents, and I say this having a 16-year-old at home and a 20-year-old still at home, well, back at home, we can talk more about that later, but who can be really, everyone has a different parent-child dynamic. So when we're talking about talking with your child about career planning, it doesn't need to be an epic sit down 4-hour-long family meeting to talk about career planning. These could be 5-minute interactions on a commute to school, on the way to a sports practice, on the way to the grocery store, just little snippets. Hey, have you thought about this? Or what are you thinking? So those, we find a lot of times, especially with parents and families, can be some of the best conversations, short and frequent, not necessarily epic and feeling like a school meeting or a work meeting. So short little snippets. So that could help build up the number of times that you talk with your teen. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about these career journeys and things that we do with youth, share some of that information with you, and hopefully you'll have some takeaways that you can bring back into your households and working with your children. So for aspirations, this is me in high school. I wanted to be an interior decorator when I was in high school. When I was in middle school doing career exploration, I wanted to be a chef, not just any chef. I wanted to be a chef at a Chinese restaurant. I loved woks. My mom had 2 of them, and that was what I wanted to do. Am I a chef in a Chinese restaurant? No. Am I an interior decorator? No. So lots of different aspirations and interests as we go through starting our career planning. So something important to think about. I have noticed in my own kids and kids that we work with that developmentally, their interests can change based on what they're exposed to, what they're watching on TV, what they're, when kids are really young, a lot of the things are like what they dress up as for Halloween costumes. Maybe you have a child who wanted to be a pro athlete or a superhero because they're watching lots of superhero movies. Then as they get older, they might start to think about their interests, even some of their aptitudes, things they're good at, and connecting that to what they might want to do. I remember when my son was in 6th grade, he wanted to be a superintendent. I'm like, of a school? You know what that is? Why? He said, I would have so many more snow days than we have now. So he learned that the superintendent was in charge of making that decision. So just seeing those different interests developmentally. And then of course, as students get older, they start understanding more about what their future holds, what opportunities there are. They're exposed to more advanced courses in high school. They might start to say, oh, I'm really good at math. I might want to do this, or I'm really good at science. I might want to go into engineering or do medical research or biotech. They can start connecting those interests. So here I am today working in a nonprofit organization, which I did not know as a teenager you could earn a living in. I thought you could only volunteer for nonprofits. So I'm just going to ask you on Zoom and in the room, what were your career aspirations when you were in high school? Does anyone want to share? Can you think of what? I'll do this side if I'm over here if you want to do that side.
I wanted to travel the world and meet people.
Really? So did you connect that to a career? Or what was that career?
I became a professional clown.
Okay, so you actually did. Okay, so you've jumped ahead to my next question. So any other aspirations when you were in high school? Anyone want to share? And Kathi, if you're seeing any, come in the chat. Okay. Okay, so a chef and is now a social worker. I'll go ahead and pop up the next question. What is your career now? So you had that interest and tied it to what you do. So chef and social worker, are those the same thing? Okay, what was the next one, Kathi? Okay, nutritionist and investment advisor, are those the same? No. Anyone else want? Go ahead. Police officer. Okay, and that's, what you wanted to do in high school, what do you do now? Truck driver. Okay. What? Less paperwork. So when talking with teens about their interests, share your own stories. Encourage them to talk to other people about what they wanted to do, what their aspirations are, and what they do now, and if there are connections or not, and why. Those are really good conversations to have. some conversations I've heard with teens will be maybe some kind of assumption that you have to pick what you want to be in high school, or if you're going to go off to college, you have to pick your major and you have to stick with it. That is so rare. So that's the point we're making with that. And here in this graphic, success, we talk with students a lot about success. There's a lot of people who define success for students. So a message we bring to students is that you define success for yourself, and that definition will change over time, depending on where you are in your life, what your interests are, what your goals are, what your aspirations are. So we let students know this is often what the path to success looks like. There are twists and turns. When I was making that squiggly arrow, I actually, if you go to the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, every 2 years, they update data on how many times people change jobs. It's right now 12.4 times on average. So I was trying to get 12 twists and turns in there, because if you want to be one thing, you might go to school for that. You might get training for that. You might do it for a little while, and you might decide your interests have changed, and that's okay. And I think sharing that message with youth is critical, because I think it sets more realistic expectations. If you let them know, it maybe alleviates a little bit of disappointment if something doesn't work out. I just talked to a student on Thursday who said, you know, I started doing this program in school in culinary arts, but I'm really interested in childcare. And they were feeling like it might not be okay to switch because they had already picked culinary arts. So there's some really good conversations you can have with youth about that. And I'm not doing a workshop on college, but whoever is might have a good statistic on how many times college students change majors. Same thing, changing interests, and really letting students know that that's okay, and that you might have done it, or other family members or friends or neighbors have done it. So this is a one story I wanted to share with you. For this workshop, we did a lot of interviews. We interviewed recent college grads, high school grads, college admissions officers, employers. And this is a story that a high school graduate, class of 2020, shared. When I asked her, what would you want? What do you wish people had told you when you were in high school? She said, be sure to let kids know they don't have to have it all figured out by the end of high school. Paths will shift as they learn more and gain experience, and new opportunities can come up when you aren't expecting it. So this high school grad, class of 2020, rough year to graduate high school. Trip to France was canceled. Prom was canceled. End of crew season was canceled. Went off to college, full scholarship, honors program, majoring in journalism, left after a year, put her writing portfolio out, ended up getting 9 different offers by newspapers and magazines to do writing, and now she's editing 2 publications. So she stuck with that career field, but switched her path to get there. COVID might have had a little bit to do with that, but maybe not, hard to know. So just thinking about those switches and changing lanes and still finding success by how you define it for yourself. Okay, so a few things. Identifying interests is really helpful for youth. Have any of you ever taken a career interest survey yourself? Do you know if your child has taken a career interest survey? So ask. If you just go on the internet and search career interest survey, maybe put in free, you can find all sorts of them. This one that I'm going to share, I'm going to give you a QR code in a minute. This is the U.S. Department of Labor. My Next Move has a career interest survey that's arranged by RIASEC. Has anyone heard of RIASEC? It's Holland codes from many decades ago that are still used today to define college majors. And a lot of employers and human resources departments use them to categorize jobs. The U.S. Department of Labor uses it to categorize jobs. It's just an acronym. R is realistic. These are people identifying their interests And if you rank high in realistic, you're a doer. Investigative, you're a thinker. Artistic, you're a creator. Social, you're a helper. We have to tell teens when we do this. It's not social media, it's a helper, like social worker or teacher or careers like that. Enterprising are the persuaders, and conventional are the organizers. Example, accountants, bookkeepers fit in conventional. Entrepreneurs, CEOs, enterprising, social workers, teachers, helpers. Artistic can be all different things. It can be performing arts, visual arts, graphic design. Investigative, where a lot of scientists are. And realistic, the doers tend to be people who are using machines, agriculture, things like that. So those are just some examples. So if you wanted to do this test yourself, it's 60 questions, takes about 5 minutes. You can scan that QR code, do it yourself, and then maybe see if your youth wants to do it, if your student wants to do it. They might have done it at school. Some tech centers in Vermont do it. I'm finding most high schools don't. There are some school districts in other states where they have all students do this. So by the time they graduate high school, they know what their strengths and interests are. So I'm going to share with you my results. I just did this about a month ago. Everyone's is different, but you can be a little bit of everything. Some people might be less of all things, more of all things, not much at all of something and a lot of something else. And you can just kind of evaluate and think about, is where you are today, what you're doing today, aligned with those interests. So after you get your results, you can go and click on all sorts of resources that bring you to occupations related to your strengths and interests. So this is mine. I clicked on, there's instructions. It's very straightforward. It asks you what your job zone is. Like, do you have experience in preparation? I picked 4 on a scale of 5 because I'm in the middle of my career. I have a college degree. I have 25 years of work experience. So I picked 4, and it brought up these careers as possible career options for me. A few of those very related to what I do. So students might pick a 1, college students may pick a 2, and you can go and experiment and click on all of them and see what the occupations are, but it'll bring you to entry-level occupations related to your interests. So it's pretty accessible, pretty easy to do. If you can do this yourself to understand how this thinking process works, that'll help you with guiding your teen on doing the same process. All right, so something else we talk to students about a lot are skills that we call essential skills. The state of Vermont Agency of Education calls them transferable skills, skills that almost every occupation uses and relies and depends on. So we tell students that if you can identify, build, practice, and demonstrate some of these essential skills, you can be prepared for a range of occupations. So while you're on that path to success, if you're taking all those twists and turns, changing majors, changing interests, changing jobs, you have a set of core skills that can be transferred to all different occupations. So it's a simple but brilliant concept. Some of my colleagues who work in labor market information, which there's Vermont Career Outlook, I recommend that workshop. They talk a lot about this data for Vermont. There's statistical data on occupations of people who focus on one skill and one skill only. When they want to change careers, they have a really hard time doing anything else. So pro athletes are a really good example of that. You might have gotten your 10,000 hours, become really good at something, but don't necessarily have those essential skills that could be applicable to many occupations. So I have a question for you, 2 questions for you. So both in Zoom and in the room, is there a skill that you learned from your first job? Think way back to your first job that you still use today. Think about that, and would anyone be willing to share?
My very first job was a lifeguard and interacting with people and like de-escalating situations.
Okay, so that sounds like a few. Lifeguard was the first job, working with a lot of people. That's an amazing skill to have, and de-escalating things. So, so if there's like a crisis or something gets chaotic, you could keep people calm. Is that angry people? Oh, okay. Okay. So, great skills to have, and you still use them today. Okay. Anyone else have something they'd like to share?
Yeah, my first job was in a restaurant, and I do almost all the cooking for my family now.
Okay, so cooking, culinary skills, first job, cooking in a restaurant and doing a lot of cooking now. That's great. And we talked to youth about skills. A lot of these transferable skills can also be relevant in your household, managing money, filing taxes, keeping upkeep of a home, raising kids, not just jobs, a lot of these skills. Is there anything that came in on Zoom, Kathi? Okay. And you have one?
On same lines. I mowed lawns when I was a kid, so the business aspect of it with dealing with customers, collecting money and all the sorts.
Great. So sometimes when we're working with youth and we're building first resumes, they'll say, I don't have any work experience, because they have to fill in that section on the resume that's work experience. So that's when, someone who's guiding them, it might be you as a parent, an educator, can say, well, have you ever done anything that you've been paid for? Oh yeah, mowing lawns. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the skills and the experience that gave you. Were you responsible? Did you show up on time? Did you do a good job? Did you interact with the customer? That's customer service. Same thing with babysitting, mucking stalls, all the things that Vermont kids do as their first jobs. Maybe not as much in Chittenden County, but all over Vermont, we find a lot of first jobs of teens. They might discount those experiences and those skills, but they're really those basic essential skills. So second question, as an adult, what is something you wish you had learned sooner? Either on Zoom or in the room.
You don't have to choose one thing.
Yeah, so that I think that's great to hear that, because that I think is a message a lot of young people latch on to that isn't necessarily true. You wished you would have learned to delegate? Huh. Kind of thinking of my kids when they were in their early teens, if I would have wanted them to have had that skill. I think so, yeah, but earlier. Okay, so learning to delegate, that's huge, because a lot of times people think they need to do it all, or if they want it done right, they have to do it themselves. Those are really not effective approaches to doing work. Learning how to delegate is a good one. I haven't heard that one before. That's great. Any others? Kathi, any on Zoom? It's okay to change your mind, to value myself and ask for what I need. Huh. Okay, public speaking, that's a tough one, because in the classroom, do you remember high school having to get up and present? How many loved that? Good. Wow. Okay, one in the room. So public speaking is interesting because it's kind of a hard skill to learn early. It takes a lot of time and practice to get comfortable doing that. Schools give lots of opportunities for it, but it's pretty tough in front of your peers. So go. Yep. Oh, clear boundaries between work and life. When we do that success graphic with students, we talk about goals and where you're at in your life. And that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has all the reasons people do those 12.4 job changes. It's fascinating. Could be they relocated, could be they have completed education, so they switch jobs. One of them is work-life balance. They switch jobs because they want a better work-life balance. Now, do you think they do that when they're 22? Probably not. It's probably more in the middle of their career when they have maybe families or just realize that job's really taking a lot of my waking hours and I would like a change so I could do some hobbies. So all good conversations to have with youth. So we talk with students about the 4 C's. These are nationally accepted essential skills. There are 4 categories of skills that start with the letter C. Any guesses on what some of those might be? Go ahead in the Zoom chat if you have any ideas for groups of skills that start with the letter C. Anyone here have an idea of an essential skill that almost every job requires? Okay, so communication, I've already heard it. Another one? Okay, we have communication here too on Zoom. Critical thinking is coming up. So that's one of the 4. Creativity is one of the 4. So there's one more. Okay, so you got them all. Now, this is so interesting because when we have groups of students, back in October, we were in the Northeast Kingdom. We had 20 middle schools bus their kids to NVU Linden. I asked them to guess. I had the same slide. They said every C word under the sun, but these 4 things. It was, you want to know some of them? It was charisma, conceptualization. These were middle schoolers. I was blown away. I said, okay, I'm kind of sold right now that if you came to me and applied for a job and you had all these characteristics, I might hire you without these. But it's fascinating to see where the brains are. They're not necessarily 8th graders, of course. But even last week, Thursday, I did this with high school students. They got most of them. They get stuck on critical thinking. Takes them a while to come up with that one. We actually define it. Does anyone know what the definition of critical thinking is? And want to try? Okay, thinking outside of the box. What the definition that we give to students is it's taking in information and processing it to make a decision. So we have lots of examples of how we ask students. Sometimes we'll ask students at the beginning of a workshop, how many of you have skills already? Very few hands go up. We do this slide. We talk about, do you have communication skills? Tell me how. How did you get those skills? How did you practice them? How can you demonstrate them? They give all sorts of examples. Oh, I have a YouTube channel. I create YouTube content. I talk to people. I do narration and voiceover. Oh, I love doing this in a class. I have this, debate club after school. So they have all these ways they're getting these skills. So then at the end of the session, we say, how many of you have essential skills already? And all the hands go up. So they don't necessarily know that these skills that they're learning in school, practicing when they're volunteering or in their households or babysitting or mowing lawns, that they're building these skills already. So if you can do something, my kids are probably sick of it because at home I'm like, look, you're building a skill. You don't necessarily have to do that all the time. They will get sick of it, but it is nice, I think, to get some validation of what you're doing right now is building a skill, even if it is just a hobby or just something you're interested in. That's building a skill. Okay, so some things you can do to encourage your teen to develop essential skills: identifying skills they already have. We just talked about that. Building new skills, examples. You might say, is there a skill you want to get better at? And then brainstorm. How can you get better at that? What can you do? Really put questions out there. Get them doing some critical thinking, maybe some online research, maybe asking around neighbors if they can try new things and do new things. Demonstrating and articulating skills. This, I think, is one of the trickiest pieces of skills building and maybe one of the least frequently talked about with youth. Okay, you practice skills, you got some skills, how do you demonstrate it? And the reason we find out this is tricky for students is when they go on their first job interview and they can't talk about their skills. They have them, they've practiced them, they're good at lots of things, but they have a hard time coming up with examples and talking about it. Does anyone have a child in 4-H? just thinking of this now, they're a good example of whatever they are pursuing in 4-H, they have to be able to demonstrate their skills to a judge. And they actually have scoring criteria that all of the students in 4-H know about ahead of time. It's amazing. So these kids come out of these programs able to articulate and demonstrate their skills and talk to someone else about it. It's a missing piece for a lot of students to be able to do that. So think of little ways, like, tell me about that. So instead of like, did you have a good day at school on the car ride home from school, or what did you learn today? Maybe think about framing some of those questions. Like, is there a skill that you worked on today that you think you got better at, and tell me how? Could be a question. They still might not like it, but you can try. Okay, so last piece here is career occupations. We talked to students about the difference between jobs and careers. A job is something you perform. It's work you perform to earn money. A career is a journey. Sometimes those words are used interchangeably. So that career journey, that professional journey might be made up of many jobs, like those 12.4 changes. And a job is one thing you're doing. So occupations is another word for job. We talk with students about opportunities. We'll get to in our own state here, but any guesses how many occupations there are in the United States? These are different occupations that are defined by the US Department of Labor. Any guesses on Zoom or in the room? Every 2 years, this figure is updated. Sometimes jobs phase out, we don't have them anymore, new jobs are created. Less, 8,200. Less. Close. So it's 1,040. These are occupations that are identified by the US Department of Labor. We'll show you, you're going to have some resources in a minute that will show you some of these. So in Vermont, and have you guess, it has to be less than 1,040 because that's all 50 states combined. So Vermont has less. I think it has more than the average teenager thinks it does when we do guessing for this with kids. Any guesses on Vermont? How many occupations the Vermont Department of Labor has? How many? So a little less, a little more. 555. So this is really interesting. We're going to go over the brochure that Colin handed out at the beginning. That's in your hands. This has 10% of Vermont's occupations. They're the top paying and the highest demand occupations in Vermont fit in that brochure. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Vermont has 550 occupations right now. All of those occupations are important. They wouldn't be here. They wouldn't be labeled by the Department of Labor if we didn't need them. Someone somewhere needs people to fill these roles, but some have a few openings, some have a lot of openings. Some pay really well, some don't. Those two things aren't always aligned. So something that can help you with talking to your student, your child at home, is just about some of the opportunities that are out there. So they've identified their interests by taking a survey. They know what their skills are. They're working on their skills. Now let's talk about occupations. So there's all sorts of ways that students can do this. They can do online research. You can do it with them. They can do informational interviews. They can ask around. They can talk to you. Have you talked to your own child about what you do for work? I did not ask this question on Thursday when we were at St. Michael's College with 500 some students. I had students in the room who said, I don't know what my mom does for work. I don't even know the name of her company. These are high school students. So really think about talking to your child about what you do. You're an example, a real life example of an occupation in their household. They can go on workplace tours. They can do that through school. You could bring them to your workplace. They can do job shadows, same thing through school, through you. Internships. If your student's at a high school, hopefully they have a flexible pathways coordinator, a multiple pathways coordinator, a work-based learning coordinator, an internship coordinator who can hook them up with an internship. I'll say it's not It's good for you to give them ideas, not the best idea for you to coordinate that internship for them. There's a lot that they can learn from doing that on their own. And then they can understand the skills, education, and training required for various careers to help them make choices in high school and after high school. So if you take a look in here, this is labor market information. Have any of you ever looked at labor market information before? Do you know what it is? It is not an area of interest of mine, but I have amazing colleagues who work for the Vermont Department of Labor. Kevin Stapleton, one of them, is here today doing the Vermont Career Outlook, that they love data about jobs. So what you're holding in your hand is a resource that the McClure Foundation and the Department of Labor put together mainly for high school youth, but anyone can use it. We give this to all the students that we work with and talk about occupations. They are arranged in different categories by, guess what? RIASEC codes, that career interest survey I shared with you earlier. So you'll see there, do you like to observe, learn, analyze, and solve problems? Those would be people who are high up on either the investigative or the conventional interests. So here's some occupations in Vermont that are the highest paying and have the most openings. And if you look at registered nurses, that one's highlighted, 4,460 projected openings there. And so we talk to students about how many openings there are, what education is required at a minimum to get into that field, and then what the median wage is. Do you know what median is? Mathematical term, median. Go ahead in the Zoom chat, pop in that definition if you know it. Who knows what median means? We ask students this. You were going to say something, go ahead. Yep. So it's not the average, that's the mean, where you take everything, add it up, and then divide it by the number of things you just added. That's the average. They use median wages because if you take average and you're like wanting to know the wage of a software engineer and Bill Gates' wage is in there, it might skew the average quite a bit. But if you do median and you have half above, half below, it gives youth an idea of where the middle of that is. So we talk with the students about that's the middle. So if you're entry level, just starting, not a lot of experience, not much education, you're probably going to be lower than that. If you've been working in that field for a while, have a lot of education experience, you'll probably be above that. So we introduce middle schoolers and high schoolers to labor market information. So when they're finding out what their interests are and researching occupations, they can actually go look at the data. So we ask students, is there anything here you're interested in? And a lot of times they have some ideas. And then, is there anything you maybe weren't interested in, but you'd like to learn more about now that you've seen the data? And this always opens their eyes, seeing the data to different occupations they might not have considered. Another thing we like to do is say, if you know a field you're interested in, take a look at all the fields related to that. So if there's an occupation you might be interested in, go see what other occupations have similar training, similar skills required, because you might be interested in that too. An example is a lot of middle schoolers. We've done Job Shadow Day for students for 20 years. We've had about 20,000 students go through our Job Shadow Day program. We've seen 20,000 career interest surveys. In middle school, what do you think the most popular career occupation is? So that's an example of one that cropped up later. So there's a lot of interest, but not most. How many of you have a dog at home? Cat? Any guess? Veterinarian. Veterinarian is hands down the most popular occupation interest in middle schoolers, not high school students, middle schoolers. It's what they're exposed to, what they know. They bring a sick pet to the vet, they come back with a healthy pet, or that vet just is working with all these cute furry animals. So we'll pair kids up with veterinarians on Job Shadow Day, and a lot of them come back saying, not for me. So it's a really good time to explore a field. And we say middle school is not, this is not about your career defining moment here to make these choices, but just to get some exposure and understand what's really involved in these occupations. So if you're interested in being a vet, why? Let's look at occupations related to that might be a good fit for you. So kinds of comments. I'm going to end with some noteworthy items. And Kathi, I don't know what the end time of this session is. Are we right at the end? Okay. So I'm just going to share a few things that we have found in working with youth that might be something you can relate to or take away. There's a lot that influences youth. We talked earlier about sports, movies. So let me just share some things with you for youth. Entertainment, that would be movies, music, things that influence what their career interests are. Social media, huge influence, seeing what other people are doing. Peers, what their peers are interested in, those 8th graders. Oftentimes, if they're in a classroom filling out a paper and pen career interest survey, there will be 2 that are identical in every classroom because they're just filling it out exactly like their best friend is. School, what they're exposed to at school. And family, what they're exposed to in their households. There's more. So you can think about those things that are influencing them. Just make sure they get a lot of balanced exposure to different career opportunities. Now, those interviews I told you we did to create the content for this session, college admissions officers, hiring personnel at companies, high school grads, college grads, educators. There were some patterns of advice we got from them. So I'm just going to share this with you. Let your teen initiate the process for what they're going to do after high school. Might be prompted by you, encouraged by you, but if they have an interest in a field, encourage them to look it up and research it. You might know a lot more than they do, and it could be very easy for you just to provide the answer, but it's really helpful if they can learn how to research that. Listen, and ask questions. So the more parents can do to listen to their students and ask questions instead of give answers is really helpful. We heard that over and over again from young people. Youth are talked to a lot in school, at home, so do that listening. Create opportunities for exploration and skill building. Thinking about some of the experiences you do, family vacations you go on, activities you do together as a family. I know many of you are probably doing this already. The fact that you're here today tells me you probably provide a lot of great experiences and you care about those experiences. So think about, are there any potential career, just like you might take a student on a college tour. Have you ever taken them on a tour to see a workplace? If they're interested in arts, you can go tour Simon Pierce glass blowing. You can tour all different workplaces, especially here in Vermont where so much is made here. Try out some tools along with your teen, that career interest survey, and big one, this one we heard over and over and over, focus on strengths. You can imagine the flip side of that. Oh, you're not very good at that. Let's work on that. Let's work hard on that. That's where we're going to put all our energy. It's actually really helpful to focus on strengths. It's a bigger motivator for working with youth. Okay, so we always talk about how students have access to so many people. I'm just going to fly this list past you. These are people that you can encourage your students to talk to. I learned with my own kids that a lot of times they like talking with someone else more than they like talking with me. So set up a lunch date with a neighbor, did that. My daughter got a lot of great college advice from her without all the baggage that comes with the family conversations. So that's another example of how you can support your teen, is by encouraging and making those conversations with others comfortable without being personally offended by that. You might have others too. And the Department of Labor has career resource centers in every region of the state that you can actually go walk into, take your student to learn information about occupations in Vermont. Okay, so I think we're at the end of our time, but I'm here if you have any questions. And hopefully Lauren and Kathi and Jesse were able to answer some questions in the chat. Yeah, thanks for coming.